Mammon is a villain who made his appearance in the latest episode of Hell of a Boss. He was the main antagonist of that episode and will now be a recurring villain throughout the series, as if we hadn't had enough of those before. Today, I'm going to analyze Mammon and see whether or not he's a good villain this show needs. Because trust me, this show desperately needs more good villains. To start off, let's take a look at his design. In terms of body shape, he's pretty different than the majority of the characters VivziePop has designed. He's extremely tall and has some meat on him. Well, it more so looks like he's wearing multiple layers of clothes to give off the illusion that he looks big, but that's besides the point. Since he's pretty big and tall, his physicality reflects how powerful he is since he's one of the 7 princes of hell. The only gripes I really have with this design is that he has the same facial features as most other male characters in both Hell of a Boss and Has Been Hotel. Just look at this collage and tell me I'm wrong. He's dressed like a jester, but is often referred to as a clown despite the two being different. And lastly, his body shape is often a joke many times he's shown.
Don't let the beard fool you. He's a child.
It's funny because he's fat.
It's gotten to a point to where we see Mammon, the sin of greed, eat more than Beelzebub, the sin of gluttony. That's pretty ass backwards if you ask me. But overall, his design is pretty neat and pretty imposing whenever it's not used for gags. Thumbs up on that. Now let's move on to the next topic. Is Mammon a threat? It's a pretty tricky question, but to determine an answer, let's ask this one question first. Was Mammon a threat in the episode? In my opinion, not really. What differentiates Mammon from many of the other villains in this show is that the villains had something up their sleeve for the future. The Dorks agents had clear proof of the demon's existence they will use in a future episode, whenever that'll be. And near the end of Harvest Moon Festival, Stryker had access to weapons that were capable of killing Stolas and had connections with Stella, who had nearly as much power as Stola's. Mammon's conflict with Fizzaroli and Asmodeus was solved way too quickly, and I genuinely have no idea what Mammon is even going to do next. Now, this unpredictability could be scary, but if Mammon was defeated in a single episode by sheer coincidence and luck, how am I supposed to assume that this won't happen again? The main thing Mammon had against Fizzaroli was his mental state. But after Fizzaroli sung a song with Asmodeus, Fizzaroli stood up to Mammon and even quit. The main advantage Mammon had against Asmodeus was that he knew that he and Fizzaroli were in a relationship and was about to expose it to the rest of hell if Fizzaroli walked away from him. But after Asmodeus revealed it himself, it turns out everyone knew the entire time. So when you actually re-watch the episode, it just takes away all of the tension because you know from the start that Mammon wasn't even a threat. Now that I think about it, it also takes away some tension from the previous episode as well, since Crimson was also aware of their relationship. And I don't believe he's a physical threat either, because if we were to believe that Mammon was stronger than Asmodeus, then Mammon would have fought the latter. Instead, he left with his tail between his legs. Near the end of the episode, Mammon tells Asmodeus that he will regret revealing his relationship with Fizzaroli, and I'm wondering what those consequences are. Beelzebub openly dates a hellhound, yet nobody shames or berates her about it. So how will Asmodeus's relationship with Fizzaroli affect him? Food for thought. But with all this evilness and hatred in him, surely there must be a good motivation for this, right? Mammon, like other villains in this show, is just evil for the sake of it. There's no established reason for Mammon being evil, as explained by Asmodeus here.
Fizz, I've known that guy since the start of hell, and he fucking sucks. Always has. He doesn't even do clown shit anymore.
Since the beginning of hell, Mammon has been a jerk for no reason, and this is just lazy writing. He has no depth and is just a one-note villain similar to Stella, which is weird considering that Beelzebub and Asmodeus are similar to Mammon, yet they aren't villains. I don't even think Lucifer is a villain either, and he's literally the king of hell. But this can't really be the only lazy writing that Mammon has, right?
But wait! There's more!
Mammon's antagonistic trait throughout the episode was being a shitty boss. He physically assaults Fizzaroli, fat shames him, insults him, exploits him for money, and so on and so forth. Now, let's pause. Isn't there another character in Hell of a Boss who shares the majority of those qualities? Come on, take a wild guess. If you guessed Blitzo, good job, you sensed the same bullshit I did. The majority of Mammon's actions can easily be traced back to Blitzo. Blitzo fat shames Moxie.
You know, it wouldn't kill you to put a salad in your body every now and then.
What?
Blitzo physically assaults Moxie.
When you set fire to my office in front of a client, you fucking dipshit! Now someone put—
And Blitzo insults Moxie.
I'm calling you slow, Moxie. God, why don't you learn to take criticism, you talentless baby-dicked troll?
But the difference between the two is that Blitzo's actions are used for comedy, while Mammon's actions are used for drama. If you ignore the tone the scenes provide, you can easily come to the conclusion that both characters are assholes and need to be shot to death. But since Blitzo's actions are supposed to be funny, he's not an antagonist. To which I have to ask this. How do you expect me to take sensitive topics like abuse and bullying seriously when the creators themselves don't? It's one of the main reasons why I think most villains in Hell of a Boss suck. They're bad people, but so are the protagonists. But we're supposed to root for the protagonists because they are quote-unquote good guys. I'm not the first to say this, and I don't believe I'll be the last. But the main cast of this show are good guys in name only, not in terms of actions. It got to a point where I wanted to see the villains succeed because at least I can sympathize with some of them. After I watched the latest episode of Hell of a Boss, there was a sudden realization that struck me with Mammon. This guy is not a main antagonist to the main cast. Instead, he's a main antagonist to the side characters Fizzaroli and Asmodeus. Mammon has never had an actual quarrel or issue with Blitzo, Moxie, Millie, or Luna, just with Asmodeus and Fizzaroli. And Asmodeus and Fizzaroli aren't part of the main cast. They're side characters. That's honestly pretty funny. Instead of focusing on the antagonists that were already made who were enemies of the main cast, the writers instead made an antagonist for the side characters. What's next? Are they gonna make an antagonist for the background characters? On second thought, I don't want that to be a possibility. I can barely take the show seriously as it is right now. Pulling a stunt like that would likely make me want to drink bleach. So, any episode that features the main cast should have no reason to feature Mammon. The only character Mammon has somewhat interacted with is Blitzo, but I can never come up with a reason as to why Mammon would even target Blitzo, since Mammon's main quarrel was with Asmodeus and Fizzaroli, who again are both side characters. I can't imagine being a villain to the side character. He's essentially a side villain when you really think about it. So, do I think Mammon is a good villain? No. Though he's an entertaining one, I got a few laughs out while watching the latest Hell of a Boss episode, which is pretty rare nowadays. But objectively speaking, he's just not a good villain. He doesn't feel like a threat. He's evil for the sake of being evil. He's not even a threat to the main cast. And you can easily tie the majority of his actions to our main protagonist. This leads me to question why I should take his actions seriously if I'm not supposed to take Blitzo's actions seriously. Not to mention, he's a pretty simplistic interpretation of greed. Because he's the sin of greed, he values money over everything else when being greedy isn't just about money. Then again, this is the same series that made the sin of lust and gluttony redeemable. But I digress. While Mammon is a fresh breath of air in terms of character design, he surely isn't in terms of villainy. Which is a shame because I was sort of looking forward to him since his design surprised me. But what can you do with a Vivzy-Pop show? So that marks the end of this video. If you disagree with me, that's fine. If you agree with me, that's also fine. If you think I should burn in hell because of this take, just don't tell me to go to Vivzy's version, because I will try to commit harakiri with an exorcist weapon. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a splendid day.
God hates Australia. The fire of God's wrath is sending hundreds of those filthy Australian beasts straight to hell.